Welcome to Old School Sundays. I'm your host, Odell. Let's get into some history. Before the Super Bowl trophies, before billion-dollar TV deals, before the modern NFL even had a name, there was mud. Cold, heavy, unforgiving mud, and a man named Fritz Pollard sprinting through it. It was 1920, the dawn of professional football. Leather helmets, no face masks, no endorsements. Just raw violence and pride. And standing in the middle of it all was a 5'9" halfback from Brown University running straight through history's color line. Pollard wasn't supposed to be there. America wasn't built for a black man to lead white men, especially not on the football field. Yet by sheer brilliance and defiance, he became the first black head coach in NFL history. He led teams, won championships, and helped shape the league's earliest identity. But when the bright lights came decades later, his name was gone, scrubbed from the record books, ignored in documentaries, and left out of the stories they told about football's birth. This isn't just a football story, it's the story of how the NFL buried its own father. Before the bright lights and billion-dollar stadiums, football was a brutal street fight played on mud and pride. In 1920, the sport was still raw. Leather helmets, cracked ribs, and pay envelopes handed out in taverns after the game. There were no endorsements, no fame, no dream of equality. And yet, in that chaos stood a man who had no business being there, at least according to the world around him, Fritz Pollard. At 5'9" and barely 165 pounds, Pollard was impossible to ignore. He ran with the defiance of a man sprinting against history itself. He wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting it. A graduate of Brown University and a war era All American, he joined a startup team called the Akron Pros, a band of ex college athletes and factory workers chasing a new kind of American dream. Pollard wasn't just their halfback, he was their heartbeat, their coach, their strategist, and most shockingly, their black leader in an era where segregation was the land of the law. Every Sunday, he ran through more than defenders. He ran through centuries of fear. Fans hurled slurs, rival teams refused to shake his hand. Some owners threatened to pull their clubs if that colored man kept coaching. But week after week, Pollard's Akron Pros kept winning. And in 1920, they were crowned the first champions in professional football history. Then the silence came. New owners took over, the headlines faded, the NFL was born, and Pollard's name disappeared from its history. For nearly 80 years, the league that profited from his courage pretended he'd never existed. This is that buried chapter, the story of the man who built professional football while the world tried to erase him. Long before the Akron mud and the noise of angry crowds, Fritz Pollard was already a name whispered with awe. Born in 1894 in Chicago's backstreets, he grew up in a world where opportunity for a black child was scarce and respect even scarcer. His father cut hair for a living, his mother cleaned houses, and Fritz spent his youth running, not from trouble, but towards something larger than life. That determination carried him to Brown University, one of the nation's most elite institutions and the last place anyone expected to see a young black man in a football uniform. By his sophomore year, Pollard had become one of the most electrifying players in college football. His speed was described as a blur of dark lightning, his balance unshakable. In 1915, he led Brown to an 8-1 record and the next year took them to the 1916 Rose Bowl, becoming the first black player to ever compete in the grandest game of the sport. At just 5'9", 165 pounds, he was often targeted by defenders not for his size, but for his skin. Rival players aimed cheap shots, fans screamed in the stands, hotels refused to house him on road trips, yet every Saturday, he answered with touchdowns. Coaches couldn't stop him, and opponents couldn't catch him. Pollard finished his college career as a consensus All-American, a national headline maker, and the symbol of what football could be if the world allowed it. When America returned from World War I, a new league began to form, one that would eventually become the NFL. Among the rough and tumble rosters of steelworkers and soldiers, one name stood out: Fritz Pollard, the man who would soon make football history and then be written out of it. When the American Professional Football Association launched in 1920, a rough, uncertain venture that would later rename itself the National Football League, most saw it as a sideshow. Teams were owned by factories, small businesses, or men with bar money to burn. There were no guarantees, no fame, and certainly no thought that it would last. But for Fritz Pollard, this was a chance to build something that had never existed before. He signed with the Akron Pros, a scrappy Ohio team composed of ex college players, steelworkers, and part time dreamers. Pollard wasn't just their star halfback, he quickly became their coach, making him the first black head coach in professional football history. His teammates, mostly white, didn't know what to make of him, yet when the ball snapped, leadership wasn't a debate, it was earned. Under Pollard's vision, Akron's defense suffocated opponents. They didn't score points in bunches, they strangled games, finishing the 1920 season undefeated at 8-0-3, earning the league's first championship. Pollard's speed and precision in the backfield made him nearly impossible to contain, while his schemes laid the groundwork for organized play calling and sideline management, concepts ahead of their time. But success came with pride. When Pollard took his team on the road, hotels barred him. Rival teams refused to take the field against a black coach. Some players demanded he step down. Opponents spit on him in pileups. Yet week after week, he kept winning. In an era where no one believed a black man could lead white men, Fritz Pollard did exactly that. He built the NFL's first championship legacy, and in return, the league would build its own legacy by pretending he never existed. For a few brief years, it looked like Fritz Pollard had beaten the system. He was coaching, winning, and rewriting what was possible in American sports. But behind the cheers and championship banners, resentment was brewing. The same league that crowned him its first champion was about to erase his legacy with a single, quiet act of collusion. In 1926, the Akron Pros folded, and with them, Pollard's position vanished. No formal statement, no thank you, no farewell, just silence. Owners had begun murmuring about maintaining the game's image, and by the early 1930s, the NFL's doors slammed shut. There was no official policy, no press release, just a gentleman's agreement among team owners to stop signing black players. For the next 13 years, not one black athlete would take the field in the National Football League. Pollard was out, along with a handful of other black pioneers who'd followed in his footsteps. The sport had become a mirror of America's segregation. White on the surface, black greatness buried beneath it. While the league promoted men like Red Grange, George Halas, and Curry Lambeau as its founding fathers, the name Fritz Pollard disappeared from programs and record books. The irony was cruel. The very plays, strategies, and leadership style he introduced were now used by coaches who would never speak his name. When he protested, the NFL called him bitter. When he spoke of injustice, they said he was exaggerating. By 1933, professional football was officially segregated, an unspoken truth the league would never admit. Fritz Pollard, the man who helped build the foundation of the game, had been written out of its story. But history doesn't stay buried forever. When the NFL turned its back on Fritz Pollard, he didn't beg for a return. He built his own field. With the league's silent ban in full effect, Pollard turned his eyes to Harlem, the cultural epicenter of Black America. The Harlem Renaissance was in full bloom. Duke Ellington was composing symphonies, Langston Hughes was writing the future, and now Fritz Pollard was bringing football to 125th Street. He founded a team called the Brown Bombers, a name both defiant and poetic. They weren't just athletes, they were a statement, proof that black men didn't need permission to play the game they helped create. Under Pollard's leadership, the Bombers became one of the top black semi pro teams in the nation, drawing crowds across the Northeast. They faced relentless barriers, denied fields, denied funding, denied coverage, but they played anyway. Fast, organized, and fearless, just like their coach. Off the field, Pollard became a pioneer in business. He launched FD Pollard & Co., a talent agency for black athletes and entertainers, decades before sports agencies became an industry. Later, he founded a newspaper and even entered film production, determined to tell the stories mainstream America ignored. While the NFL grew richer and whiter, Pollard thrived in the shadows, becoming a self-made symbol of black resilience. He turned exclusion into enterprise, using intellect and charisma to open doors in a country that kept slamming them shut. For the rest of his life, he mentored young athletes, telling them to play for something bigger than money or fame. Play, he said, so they can't forget you, even when they try. The NFL may have buried his career, but it couldn't bury his impact. For most of the 20th century, Fritz Pollard's name existed only in whispers. Textbooks skipped over him, NFL retrospectives ignored him. When the league celebrated its founding fathers, Pollard's face was nowhere to be found. But time has a way of correcting what silence can't erase. In the early 1980s, a new generation of sports historians began digging through forgotten archives, yellowed newspaper clippings, and dusty team rosters. What they found stunned them. The story of a man who had not only played and coached, but won at the dawn of professional football, and had been systematically written out of the narrative. Their work forced the league to confront its buried past. In 2005, nearly 84 years after his championship season, Fritz Pollard was finally inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The honor came decades after his death, but it symbolized something far greater: recognition that football's foundation had been built, in part, by a man America refused to see. His influence continues through the Fritz Pollard Alliance, an organization named in his honor that advocates for diversity among NFL coaches and executives. Every time the league debates the Rooney Rule, every time a black coach is hired or fired, Pollard's ghost lingers. A reminder that representation in football didn't begin with equality, it began with rebellion. He was more than a pioneer, he was the blueprint. The man who proved that greatness doesn't need permission and that silence, no matter how long it lasts, can't bury truth. Fritz Pollard didn't just change football, he built the bridge that every black athlete since has walked across. And for 80 years, the NFL pretended that bridge never existed until now. History has a strange way of remembering the wrong people first. The NFL celebrates its dynasties, its quarterbacks, its billion-dollar icons. But the man who helped start it all had to wait 8 decades just to be named. Fritz Pollard didn't have an agent, a shoe deal, or a camera crew. All he had was courage, brilliance, and the will to lead when the world said he couldn't. He played through hate, coached through segregation, won through silence, and when the league turned its back, he built his own. That's not just football history, that's American history. So the next time you watch the Super Bowl, the next time you see a black coach pacing the sideline, remember the man who did it first, the one they tried to erase. Fritz Pollard didn't just open the door, he kicked it off its hinges. Because legends don't die when they're forgotten, they die when we stop telling their story.